I love it. All right. We got a long ways to go and a short time to get there. I love it. Hey, welcome tonight to this evening's Christmas Eve gathering. We're excited that you're here. My name's Brad, one of the pastors here. Let me just tell you some evidences that you have chosen wisely, okay? You could be here and look at all the smiley faces, or you could be combat shopping at Walmart, right, Jared? Right? Exactly. So I'm so excited that you're here. If you're here for the first time, we just pray that you just feel comfortable and at home and at rest. Hey, kids, right now we're having a coloring contest. Okay, kids? So you should have some supplies. If you don't, go downstairs. No? Huh? You don't want to be a part of it? You already won? No? All right. And so what we're going to do is kids have some coloring materials throughout the course of this gathering. Color, and at the end, turn them in, and we've got 3 prizes that we're going to be giving away, okay? All right, so there you go. All right, let me get started with asking a few questions, okay? Number one, have you ever asked yourself the question, like, how in the world did I get here? Like, did I land in these circumstances, or how did I land in this season of life? Like, what in the world happened? And the truth is, sometimes in life, the only way to see clearly where we are is we have to pause and we have to look back. And today, on the eve of Christmas, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pause. We're going to look back at the miraculous gift of God's grace to us, the gift of Jesus. We're going to look back at how God's activity intersects with our lives, and at the same time, it answers that question for us, like, how in the world did we get here? Now, the truth is, some of you come from a diversity of church backgrounds, and maybe you've gone to a Christmas Eve gathering in the past, so you have some expectations what tonight may look like or what it may feel like. I want to take a moment. I want to share with you what you can expect tonight, okay? Number one, please no applause, okay? This is going to be a shorter message than normal, okay? We're shooting for like 15, 20 minutes right here, okay? Number two, we will land in a place where we celebrate the birth of Jesus. Also know this, at TFAB, we go through books of the Bible verse by verse, and we have been journeying through the Book of Ruth for the last month. And so tonight we're going to conclude our journey through Luke, which you will see beautifully lands us in a place where we can peer into the manger and see God's grace to us, okay? So back to our question, like, how in the world did we get here? To answer that, we have to go back. We have to go back hundreds of years prior to the birth of Jesus, and take another look at the activity of God. He's setting the stage for one of the greatest gifts of mankind. So we go back to Ruth. Now, like I said, we've been journeying through the book of Ruth for the last month. If you are new tonight, I just want to give you a few bullet points to catch you up. The book of Ruth is all about redemption. It's all about God's redemption. It's a story of a Jewish lady who goes to Moab. In Moab, her husband dies, her sons die after they've married. Their sons have married these Moabite women, and later on, one of the Moabite daughter-in-laws and her, they return to Bethlehem. It's all about redemption. This Moabite woman, she's not a Jew, so that means she's not part of the Abrahamic covenant. Someone who didn't deserve God's grace. She didn't earn God's grace. Someone who God acted on her behalf despite herself. So this story, it's all about God's character. It's all about God's ability, and within it, it's all about God's activity. So we can look to it, and we can start to frame a picture in our minds of the character of God and what we can expect in our lives. So in that context, we're going to wrap up our journey through Ruth tonight, starting in chapter 4, verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, and this would have been her mother-in-law, "Blessed be the Lord, who's not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. And he shall be to you a restorer of life, a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him." Then Naomi took the child, laid him on her lap, and became his nurse. And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi," and they named him Obed. Here we go. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, and Hezron fathered Ram, and Ram fathered Amminadab, and Amminadab fathered Nahshon, and Nahshon fathered Salmon, and Salmon fathered Boaz, and Boaz fathered Obed, and Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. Okay? Now, notice that the book of Ruth, as we've been going through it, it lands with a genealogy. Okay, so like this is the family tree. This is what happens later on in life. This is what comes after this Moabite woman has been redeemed. But according to Ruth, this family tree only goes so far. And here's the beautiful thing. The book of Matthew picks up with a family tree. In Matthew chapter 1, starting in verse 6, please make sure you've had some caffeine because this can get old really fast. Here we go. And Jesse was the father of David the king, and David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon fathered Rehoboam, and Rehoboam fathered Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, his brothers at the time of the deportation of Babylon. You're like, really? This is Christmas Eve service? Yep, keep going. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, something like that. And he was, that nailed it. There we go. And he was the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of, I'm trying to get this done in 20 minutes. I'm flying through this. And Abihud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor, and Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliad, and Eliad the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. Now, let's just pray, light some candles, and say, nailed it, okay? Excellent. Now, some of you are like, really? Like, I was expecting more of us just on Christmas Eve peering into a manger, hearing the angels sing, right? Like, why this genealogy? Here's the truth. Genealogy really does matter. Sometimes we have to look back to not only see where we are, but sometimes we have to look back to actually see where we are going. But here's the problem. Sometimes in our lives, our circumstances, we're so saturated with our circumstances, we're so close to our circumstances that we can't see beyond ourselves. It's like trying to read a book literally with my nose on the page. I can't focus. And so tonight we need to zoom out. We need to see the activity of God. We need to see God's track record in the past. And so this is dealing with his character. This is dealing with his promises. It all centers around the activity of who God is. Genealogy is important. The first point of the genealogy is this. God is working out his purposes, and he will fulfill his promises. Working out his purposes, and he's going to fulfill his promises. Now, caution to you, okay? God rarely, if ever, fulfills his promises on your timeline. Okay? So that means you can't do this. You can't set it to your calendars or any measurement of time. The first thing that we're taught through the genealogy of Jesus is that God may appear to be very slow, but he never forgets his promises. Matthew starts out by saying this. These are the generations of Jesus Christ, son of David, the son of Abraham. Now, right away, that reminds us of something, that Jesus Christ was promised hundreds of years, generations before he actually showed up. God at one point comes to David and says, hey, David, guess what? One of your ancestors, or one of your lineage is actually going to sit on the throne forever. There will be no end to his reign. Prior to that, he goes to Abraham and said, hey, Abraham, come for a walk with me. Come on out of your tent. Like, look up. Do you see the stars in the sky? Can you number those stars in the sky? This is my promise to you. This is going to be your family. This is going to be your family tree. And it wasn't for more than 2,000 years later that an angel shows up to Mary and says, oh, you favored one, begins to explain to her that she is going to be the mother of the Messiah. And what happens? She burst out in worship and in song, and the lyrics to her song says this: He remembered his promise to our father Abraham, even as he said. So for 2,000 years, God had made these promises. In fact, 400 years, if you remember this, in history, 400 years before Jesus shows up on the scene in flesh, it was silent. There were no prophets. Like prior to that, like prophets would show up and say, man, things are bad, but the Messiah is coming. Like things are bad, but God's made a promise, it's coming. But for 400 years, there hadn't even been a prophet. It looked like God had completely forgotten his promises. Listen, time out. Like, man, I'm putting the cookies on the bottom shelf for us tonight. In times in our life, it may seem like God is absent. He's working so slowly. But here's the truth. When God's promises come true, and here's what we need to know tonight, they do come true. His promises always exceed our expectations, and they bring great joy with them. God seems to forget, but he never forgets his promises. He comes through in ways we can't even imagine, even beyond what we can imagine. And by the way, let's acknowledge this tonight on Christmas Eve. Christmas, for some, can be pretty bittersweet. Let's just care for ourselves this morning, or this evening. For some, it can be bittersweet. You think of this past year, everything you've gone through. A lot of times, individuals are fighting with the fact that it feels like sometimes God's promises are just absent, void. You may say to yourself, God, you promised to bless us, but like, where is that blessing? God, you promised to give us the desires of our heart, but God, why is my heart so broken? God, you promised to give me what I need, but God, why do I suffer so much want? And listen, if that's you tonight, just give yourself the grace of acknowledging that truth. It's okay to acknowledge that. But I want to quote to you a guy named Tim Keller. If you don't know who that is, he's an author, was a pastor in New York. He says this, he says, the mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. In other words, God does a perfect, beautiful work in his time. And we read the Bible and we see the promises of God to those who believe. He promises things like this. He's able to give us more than we dare ask or think. Like time out. How big's your imagination? He promised to give you things bigger than you dare ask or think. Part of that's what's coming down the pike. When you die and you see him face to face, right? How big's your imagination? By the way, also know this, as we're going through this with God, a promise made is a promise kept. A promise made is a promise kept. Okay? Through genealogy tonight, here's what we see. We see the gospel. We see the gospel. In fact, if there's anybody out here tonight and you're saying, man, I call myself a Christian, I consider myself a believer, but it doesn't feel like God's come through for me, then maybe God shouldn't come through for me because I've made some mistakes. Like I've done some stuff, right? And maybe I'll never have all these great things that God has promised. If that's you, let's go back and let's look at the genealogy again, okay? Verse 2, it says this, Isaac begat Jacob. Then it says, Jacob begat Judah. By the way, how did Jacob begat Judah? Well, if you remember this, Jacob was a swindler. He was a liar. He dressed up like his older brother and stole his older brother's birthright. His brother finds out about it and all hell breaks loose. His brother wants to kill him. Like he is on the run. He's running for his life. He's a fugitive. His family is now fractured and it's his fault. Yet, because he's a fugitive, while he's on the run, he meets who? Rachel, the love of his life. And from that union, who comes out of their lineage? The Messiah. This means that with God, there's no plan B. Like Rachel wasn't plan B. Jesus, the Messiah, was not plan B. And yes, Your genealogy is your family tree, but here's the beautiful thing. God has a track record of redeeming family trees. I want you to look at Jesus' family tree here. Like the gospel has a track record of removing distinctions and categories. Who's in Jesus' family tree? Well, let's just start with the general. In the general, you may have noticed this. There's 5 women listed in Jesus' family tree. They're Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba. By the way, she's not called Bathsheba. Did you catch that? She's called what? The wife of Uriah. And then there's Mary. But there's 5 ladies that are listed in this family tree, and that would have been abnormal because the culture of that day, they only took track of the men and the sons, right? And so God brings in women as if to say the Messiah is proud of women in his family, as if to say the status of women will be forever changed by this coming Messiah. And that's not all. Look there were Gentiles listed in Jesus' family tree. And for the good Jew, you know this, like they wouldn't even walk where a Gentile walked. They were afraid of getting cooties. They were afraid of being ceremonially unclean. Yet here in the midst of the genealogy of the King of Jews, and the king of the universe is Rahab. She's a Canaanite. Remember, she helps the children of Israel at Jericho? I'm going to come back to her in a minute. And there was Ruth that we've studied for a month now. She was this Moabite. She was born on the wrong side of the Jordan River. They were Gentiles. Why? I would submit to you because Jesus is proud of people with the wrong pedigree. People from the quote-unquote wrong nationality. People from the wrong race. But that's not all. It's not just that there were women in the genealogy. It's not just that there were Gentiles in the genealogy. There's also sinners in the genealogy. There's Tamar. Do you remember her story? Who's Tamar married to? Judah. They had kids. From their lineage comes the Messiah. But here's the problem. They were brother and sister. This was incestuous. And not only is Tamar right there in the genealogy of Jesus, but God chooses to bring the Messiah through that union. That's not all. Remember earlier I mentioned Rahab, Canaanite, but also, like, what did she do for a living? She was a prostitute. She was a prostitute. And God puts her in the genealogy. The Messiah comes through her. And that's not all. There's what? The wife of Uriah. It's almost like Matthew's kind of like digging David here, and we all know the story of David and Bathsheba, right? And here's the deal. Every one of these women, according to the Old Testament, according to Deuteronomy 23:2, they would have been considered ritually unclean, unfit for the presence of God, unfit to come and worship God. Yet it appears Jesus is proud of them being part of his family tree. They had faith, they gave of themselves, and now they're in the genealogy of the King of the universe. And what's all this mean? Listen, here it is. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you've done. I don't care if you've been living inside the gates of hell for the last 10 years, right? It doesn't matter what you've done, doesn't matter who you are. The love and grace of God is extended to you this evening. Here's the $1 million question for you. To what extent does the gospel redeem a life? Through genealogy, our minds are being blown right now. And the same truth of redemption is available to you and I today. The family of God, here it is. Here's what we're seeing through the genealogy of Jesus. The family of God is this beautiful tapestry of people from every tribe and every tongue and every language, every ethnicity. And so maybe you're here tonight and you're still struggling, but like Brad, you don't know my story, right? You know I'm calling on you, Corey, right? You know you're coming up here. Can you come up here? And then Ben, where are you? Ben, you said you had a fresh breath mint for me tonight, okay? After 2 weeks ago, Ben and I, we got a little up close and personal reading scripture. Ben, can you come help me again? Yeah. Why don't you do this? Corey, can you just stand over there? Yep, way over there, and just hold this end of the rope. And no, actually, I got it backwards. I'm dyslexic. Okay, there we go. And then, I know, that's pretty good. All right, and you're right here. Okay, now hold it tight. Okay, good. You're here and you're saying, man, but you don't know my story. You don't know the things I've done. Would you just hold it right there, okay? And would you just start moving that as high and low as you can? Yep, there you go. You don't know my story. You don't know the things I've done. Like, why would God even be pleased to bless me? Why would God keep his promises in my life? Here's what this symbolizes: your sanctification journey. You know, sanctification is a process, right? So over here, what we have, just keep going. I hope, I'm giving you a workout tonight, yeah. Here it is. Before Ben, met Jesus, there was a lot of sin activity in his life over here. Like, he's looking around at things, he's saying, that looks like fun to do. He's justifying things. He's just doing whatever he wants, whatever sounds good. This is his sin activity in his life. Over here, you know what this is? This is the day he's going to die, right? And all that's going to be dealt with, okay? But here's the beautiful thing. When you place your trust in Jesus, here's what happens. In your life, God the Spirit comes upon you, resides in you, right? And so no longer is Ben looking around everywhere. His eyes are now set on eternity. And God's beginning to change his affections. You get to play the role of God tonight. Isn't that awesome, Corey? Way to go. And so keep going. Don't stop. Yeah. But here's what happens. As his eyes are now set on eternity, here's what's happening. God's going to begin to change his affections. God the Spirit's going to work in his life, right? And slowly just pull it tight. Got that over there? Here. Yeah, just pull it tight. Just keep going. Over time, here's what's going to happen. His activity is going to look different in his life. Is there times in our life where we still sin following Jesus? Yeah. But the day we die, that root of sin is going to be completely removed, right? So the Spirit of God's doing a work. Now, here's the beautiful thing. Listen. You know what God sees right now as he looks down on the life of Ben? Not focusing on all this activity over here. He's seeing Ben through the lens of Jesus. Ben has been clothed in Jesus' righteousness, and all he sees is Jesus in Ben. God's promises, listen, you place your trust in Jesus, God's promises are for you. Is he slow sometimes? Heck yeah. Does he blow our minds when he comes through? Yes, he exceeds our expectation. Thanks, guys. Thanks. He blows our minds. He exceeds our expectations. And here's the beautiful thing. On the outside, looking in the church, you know who we are? Here, let's pull out a little Rudolph illustration. We are the island of misfit toys. We are. The island of misfit toys, outcasts, screw-ups, failures, imperfect people. Here it is. Here's the gospel. Being perfectly loved by a great God, redeemed to himself forever. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. How do we apply this? Let's go back to Ruth. Here it is. In Naomi and Ruth's lives, they could have easily lived in the past. Okay? They could have just pounded it out in Moab with good excuses. Life was hard for both of them. Both of them had lost their husbands. Life was hard. Nothing left in the tank. Or they could have, by faith, pressed forward into their redemptive future. And tonight, here it is, the message of the incarnation. Tonight, the message of the gospel is to come as you are and receive God's gift of grace, to receive Jesus, and to submit to the work of the Holy Spirit in your life, leading you, guiding you, and delivering you. That's the work of the Spirit. You know what God the Spirit's going to do in your life? He's not only going to point you to Jesus continually, but here's the promise of God the Spirit in your life. He will one day personally deliver you to Jesus. And that's a beautiful thing.